The year was 1933, and somewhere on the hardpan flats of Southern California, a man named Ab Jenkins sat behind the wheel of something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a race car, it wasn't a hot rod, it was a tractor. But not just any tractor. This was a machine that had been stripped, supercharged, and tuned to chase speeds that would embarrass most automobiles of the era. The engine howled, the modified wheels clawed at the earth, and when Jenkins finally brought the beast to a halt, he'd just done something no farmer would believe. He'd pushed a farm tractor past 100 miles per hour. This wasn't a stunt. This was the opening salvo in one of the most bizarre, brilliant, and ultimately forgotten chapters in American motorsports history. For a brief, wild moment in the 1930s, tractors, those slow, plodding workhorses of the field, became speed demons. They tore across salt flats, dirt ovals, and exhibition tracks, setting records and drawing crowds that rivaled the hottest auto races of the day. And it all started because the tractor industry was dying. The Great Depression had gutted American agriculture. Farmers couldn't afford new equipment. Tractor sales plummeted. Companies like Allis-Chalmers, Minneapolis Moline, and Massey Harris were bleeding money and market share, and they knew that if they didn't do something radical, they'd vanish. Harry Merritt, the general manager of Allis-Chalmers, understood this better than anyone. He'd watched his company's sales collapse from over 20,000 units in 1929 to barely 2,000 by 1932. Something had to change, and Merritt, a man with a background in advertising and a nose for spectacle, decided that the answer wasn't better engineering or cheaper prices, it was speed. Merritt's logic was ruthless and brilliant. Farmers didn't need faster tractors. Nobody needed a tractor that could hit 100 miles per hour. But that wasn't the point. The point was attention. The point was headlines. The point was proving that your company's machines weren't just functional, but they were powerful, modern, and engineered to outlast, outperform, and outwork anything else on the market. So Merritt picked up the phone and called Ab Jenkins. Jenkins was a legend in land speed racing, a man who'd set multiple records at the Bonneville Salt Flats, driving everything from stock sedans to custom-built streamliners. He was fearless, methodical, and possessed an almost supernatural ability to push machines to their absolute limits without destroying them. More importantly, he was a master showman who understood how to turn mechanical achievement into national news. Jenkins agreed to the job, and Allis-Chalmers shipped him a Model U, a tractor designed to pull plows, not break records. The Model U was a solid machine, powered by a 4-cylinder overhead valve engine producing around 35 horsepower at the drawbar. It weighed nearly 5,000 pounds, rode on steel wheels designed for traction in mud, and had a top speed of maybe 4 miles per hour in standard configuration. It was, in other words, the last thing anyone would expect to see on a racetrack. But Jenkins and the Allis-Chalmers engineers saw potential. They stripped off the steel wheels and replaced them with pneumatic rubber tires, an innovation that was still relatively new in agriculture. They tuned the engine, increased the fuel mixture, and adjusted the timing. They removed every ounce of unnecessary weight. And then they took it to the Bonneville Salt Flats. On October 6, 1933, Jenkins lined up the Model U on the white expanse of the flats. The engine roared, louder, hotter, angrier than any tractor engine had a right to sound. Jenkins released the clutch, and the machine lunged forward. The speedometer needle climbed. 50 miles per hour, 60, 70. The tractor shook and rattled, the frame protesting under stresses it was never designed to handle, but Jenkins kept his foot down. When he finally eased off, the official timing clocks recorded a speed of 67.87 miles per hour, a new world record for a farm tractor. The press went wild. Newspapers across the country ran headlines about the world's fastest tractor. Newsreels showed Jenkins piloting the Model U across the salt, the machine kicking up twin rooster tails of white dust. For Allis-Chalmers, it was a publicity bonanza. Dealers reported a surge in interest. Farmers who'd never heard of the Model U suddenly wanted to see one in person. And Harry Merritt knew he'd stumbled onto something bigger than a single racing run. He'd found a weapon that could pull his company out of the Depression, and he wasn't about to let it go.
But speed records were just the beginning. Merritt wanted more. He wanted spectacle. He wanted drama. He wanted to take this racing tractor idea and turn it into a traveling show that would put Allis-Chalmers in front of thousands of potential customers every week. So he made a call that would change everything. He reached out to a barnstorming daredevil pilot and promotional genius named Frank Hawks, and together they cooked up a plan that would turn farm machinery into the hottest ticket in American entertainment.
Frank Hawks was not a man who thought small. By 1933, he was already one of the most famous pilots in America, a barnstormer, air racer, and aviation celebrity who'd set more than 200 speed records. He'd flown everything from biplanes to experimental racers, and he knew how to turn mechanical performance into box office gold. When Harry Merritt approached him with the idea of racing tractors at state fairs and exhibitions, Hawks didn't laugh. He saw opportunity. And more importantly, he saw a challenge. The plan was simple in concept, but wildly ambitious in execution. Allis-Chalmers would build a fleet of specially modified racing tractors, and Hawks would pilot them in head-to-head races against actual race cars at fairgrounds and speedways across the country. These wouldn't be exhibition runs where the tractor chugged around a track while the crowd politely clapped. These would be real races, timed, competitive, and designed to showcase just how fast a properly tuned tractor could actually go. The bet was that if Hawks could beat race cars, or at least keep pace with them, the publicity value would be astronomical. Allis-Chalmers went all in on the concept. They built a series of highly modified Model U tractors specifically for racing. The engines were bored out, compression ratios were increased, and custom high-flow carburetors were installed. The transmissions were modified for higher top speeds, and the final drive ratios were completely reworked. The pneumatic tires were specially sourced from Firestone, designed to handle speeds approaching 70 miles per hour, while still providing traction on dirt and clay tracks. The machines were painted in bright, eye-catching orange, and carried the Allis-Chalmers name in bold letters across the hood. They looked fast standing still. But the real innovation was in how these machines were presented. Hawks and Merritt understood that a tractor race was only as good as its opponent, so they made sure to line up against real competition: stock cars, midget racers, and modified roadsters that were drawing crowds at tracks all over the country. The matchups were carefully staged, but genuinely competitive. Hawks would line up alongside drivers in purpose-built race machines, engines screaming, and when the flag dropped, he'd hammer the throttle and send that bright orange tractor roaring down the straightaway. Sometimes he won, sometimes he didn't, but every single time, people showed up to watch. The promotional tour kicked off in 1933 and became an instant sensation. At the Indiana State Fair, Hawks raced the tractor against the field of midget racers on a half-mile dirt track in front of 15,000 spectators. The crowd, expecting to see the tractor embarrassed, instead watched in disbelief as Hawks kept pace with the race cars through the turns and even pulled ahead on the straights. The tractor didn't win, it finished third, but that didn't matter. The fact that it was even in the race was enough to make headlines. Newspapers across the Midwest ran stories about the racing tractor, and Allis-Chalmers dealers reported a surge in showroom traffic. The success of the initial events led Allis-Chalmers to expand the program aggressively. By 1934, the company had multiple racing tractors crisscrossing the country, appearing at state fairs, agricultural exhibitions, and even some commercial speedways. They hired additional drivers to handle the growing schedule, including professional race car drivers who were intrigued by the challenge of piloting a machine that had never been designed for speed. The tractors raced in front of tens of thousands of people, and the media coverage was relentless. Newsreel cameras captured the races, and the footage played in movie theaters nationwide. For Allis-Chalmers, it was marketing genius. Every race was a rolling advertisement watched by exactly the demographic they needed to reach. But Harry Merritt wasn't satisfied with just racing. He wanted speed records that would cement Allis-Chalmers as the undisputed leader in high-performance tractors. So, in 1935,
the company brought Ab Jenkins back into the fold for another record attempt, this time aiming to break the 70-mile-per-hour barrier. Jenkins returned to Bonneville with an even more heavily modified Model U. The engine had been completely rebuilt, fitted with custom pistons, a higher lift camshaft, and a tuned exhaust system. The gearing had been changed to allow for sustained high-speed running, and every component had been balanced and blueprinted to within thousandths of an inch. On a scalding summer day in 1935, Jenkins took the machine on to the Salt. The conditions were perfect: no wind, firm surface, and miles of unobstructed flat ground. Jenkins accelerated hard, the engine screaming at RPMs it had never been designed to sustain. The tractor hit 65 miles per hour, then 68, then 70. The timing clocks recorded an official speed of 70.53 miles per hour, smashing the previous record and proving that a farm tractor could legitimately compete with automobiles in straight-line speed. The achievement made front-page news, and Allis-Chalmers wasted no time plastering the record across every advertisement, brochure, and dealer display they could print. The impact on sales was undeniable. Between 1933 and 1937, Allis-Chalmers saw its market share grow significantly, fueled in large part by the publicity generated by the racing program. Farmers who'd never considered the brand were now asking dealers about the racing tractors. And the pneumatic tire technology that had been developed for the racing machines became a standard feature on production models. The races had done exactly what Merritt hoped. They transformed Allis-Chalmers from a struggling Depression-era manufacturer into a name associated with power, innovation, and modern engineering. But Allis-Chalmers wasn't alone in recognizing the value of speed. Competitors were watching, and they weren't about to let Allis-Chalmers dominate the racing circuit unchallenged. Minneapolis Moline, in particular, saw the publicity windfall and decided they needed to fight back. And when Minneapolis Moline entered the racing game, they brought with them a machine that would rewrite the rules entirely. A tractor that wasn't just fast, it was terrifying.
The machine that Minneapolis Moline rolled out in 1935 looked like something that had escaped from a fever dream. It was called the UDLX, and while it was technically a farm tractor, it looked more like a luxury automobile that had been crossed with a Sherman tank. The UDLX, short for U Deluxe, because Minneapolis Moline's marketing department had never met subtlety, featured a fully enclosed steel cab, a padded bench seat, a heater, a radio, and even windshield wipers. It was designed to be the most comfortable tractor ever built, a machine that would let farmers work in climate-controlled luxury. But underneath that cushy exterior was an engine that Minneapolis Moline had built with one eye on performance and the other on revenge. The UDLX was powered by a 283 cubic inch four-cylinder engine that, in standard form, produced around 40 horsepower. But Minneapolis Moline's engineers knew that if they were going to compete with Allis-Chalmers in the speed game, they needed more. So they built a modified racing version of the UDLX that featured a heavily tuned engine, upgraded fuel delivery, and gearing designed for sustained high-speed running. The machine weighed over 6,000 pounds, but it moved. And when Minneapolis Moline decided to take their racing program seriously, they brought in a driver who would become a legend in tractor racing history, a man named Speed Hinckley. Speed Hinckley was a professional race car driver with a reputation for fearlessness and a gift for coaxing performance out of unlikely machines. He'd driven everything from midgets to sprint cars, and when Minneapolis Moline offered him the chance to pilot their racing tractor, he jumped at it. Hinckley saw the same thing Hawks had seen, a challenge, a spectacle, and a machine that could deliver both. And when he climbed into the cab of the modified UDLX and fired up that tuned four-cylinder engine, he knew he had something special. Minneapolis Moline launched their own promotional racing tour in 1936, and the rivalry between them and Allis-Chalmers became the talk of the agricultural equipment world. The two companies staged head-to-head exhibition races at fairs and speedways, with Hinckley piloting the UDLX against Hawks in the Allis-Chalmers Model U. The races were real, competitive, and sometimes brutal, Both machines were pushed to their absolute limits, engines screaming, tires smoking, and drivers wrestling with steering wheels as the tractors slid sideways through turns at speeds that would have terrified most farmers. Crowds loved it. The races drew tens of thousands of spectators, and the rivalry generated headlines in agricultural and automotive press alike. But the competition wasn't just about racing on dirt tracks. Both companies wanted the ultimate prize, the outright land speed record for a production-based farm tractor. Allis-Chalmers had set the bar at 70.53 miles per hour, and Minneapolis Moline wanted to top it. So in 1937, they brought Speed Hinckley and the UDLX to the Bonneville Salt Flats for an all-out assault on the record. The machine had been further modified, with every component optimized for sustained high-speed running. The engine had been rebuilt with higher compression, custom camshaft profiles, and a fuel mixture tuned for maximum power. The gearing had been changed to allow the tractor to reach speeds approaching 80 miles per hour, and the tires had been specially manufactured by Firestone to handle the stress. Hinckley made multiple runs across the salt, the UDLX screaming across the white flats like a mechanized missile. The timing equipment recorded speeds in the low 70s, then the mid-70s. On his final run, Hinckley pushed the tractor to its absolute limit. The engine was running at the ragged edge of detonation, the frame was shaking violently, and the tires were starting to show signs of distress. But Hinckley held the throttle wide open, and when he finally crossed the timing lights, the clocks recorded a speed of 78.37 miles per hour, a new world record. The achievement was a massive win for Minneapolis Moline, and the company immediately launched an advertising blitz touting the UDLX as the world's fastest tractor. Dealers put the machines on display with banners proclaiming the record, and sales inquiries flooded in. But the UDLX had a problem. It was expensive. Really expensive. The fully enclosed cab, the luxury features, and the high-performance engine made it cost significantly more than a standard farm tractor, and in the middle of the Depression, most farmers couldn't justify the price. Despite the record-breaking performance and the relentless publicity, the UDLX sold poorly. Fewer than 150 units were ever produced, and most of them went to rich farmers or collectors who wanted the novelty of owning the fastest tractor in the world. But the racing didn't stop. By the late 1930s, tractor racing had become a legitimate spectator sport, with multiple manufacturers fielding racing machines and competing at events across the country. Allis-Chalmers continued to dominate the promotional circuit, with Frank Hawks and other drivers piloting increasingly modified Model U tractors at state fairs and agricultural shows. Minneapolis Moline kept pushing the UDLX in speed trials and exhibition races. And then, in 1937, a third competitor entered the fray, one that would bring a level of engineering sophistication to tractor racing that nobody had seen before. Massey Harris, the Canadian agricultural giant, had been watching the success of Allis-Chalmers and Minneapolis Moline with growing envy. They'd seen the sales bumps, the media coverage, and the crowds, and they wanted a piece of it. So they decided to build a racing tractor that would dominate the competition through sheer engineering excellence. The result was the Massey Harris Challenger, a machine that combined cutting-edge engine technology with aerodynamic bodywork and a lightweight chassis. It was powered by a 6-cylinder engine producing over 50 horsepower, and it featured advanced suspension components borrowed from automobile racing. When Massey Harris unveiled the Challenger at the World Plowing Match, it drew immediate attention. And when they announced that they were going after the land speed record, the entire agricultural world took notice.
The Massey Harris Challenger was a revelation. Where the Allis-Chalmers in Minneapolis Moline machines had been modified production tractors pushed far beyond their intended design limits, the Challenger was something closer to a purpose-built racing machine. The engineers at Massey Harris hadn't just tuned an existing model, they'd gone back to the drawing board and designed a tractor that could excel both in the field and on the track. The 6-cylinder engine was a marvel of 1930s engineering. featuring overhead valves, a high-compression cylinder head, and a sophisticated fuel delivery system that allowed the engine to produce smooth, reliable power across a wide RPM range. The chassis was lighter than competing models, built using high-strength steel alloys that reduced weight without sacrificing structural integrity. But what really set the Challenger apart was its aerodynamics. Massey Harris had consulted with automotive designers and wind tunnel engineers to develop bodywork that would reduce drag at high speeds. The hood was streamlined, the fenders were carefully shaped to channel airflow, and even the operator seat was positioned to minimize wind resistance. The result was a machine that looked fast, sleek, purposeful, and utterly unlike anything else in agriculture. When Massey Harris rolled out the Challenger for its first public demonstrations in 1938, the reaction from the farming community was a mixture of awe and skepticism. Could a tractor that looked this good actually work in the field? The answer, it turned out, was yes. The Challenger was a competent farm tractor, capable of pulling implements, handling row crop work, and providing reliable power for belt-driven machinery. But it was on the track that the machine truly came alive. Massey Harris hired a team of professional drivers to campaign the Challenger at agricultural shows and racing exhibitions across North America, and the results were spectacular. The tractor consistently clocked speeds in the mid-60s on dirt tracks, and on prepared surfaces, it could push into the low 70s. More importantly, it could sustain those speeds without the violent shaking in mechanical distress that plagued other racing tractors. The Challenger was fast, but it was also smooth, a testament to the quality of its engineering. In 1939, Massey Harris announced that they would attempt to break the land speed record. The company brought the Challenger to a prepared test track in Indiana, not the salt flats, but a long, straight stretch of concrete highway that had been closed to traffic for the attempt. The decision to use a paved surface rather than salt was controversial, but Massey Harris argued that the smoother surface would allow for a more accurate representation of the tractor's true top speed. They brought in a professional race car driver named Barney Oldfield. Yes, that Barney Oldfield, the legendary early automotive racer, to pilot the machine. Oldfield, by then in his 60s but still possessing nerves of steel, climbed aboard the Challenger and fired up the engine. The run was spectacular. Oldfield accelerated hard, the six-cylinder engine pulling smoothly through its power band, and the Challenger surged forward. The speedometer needle climbed past 60, then 70, and as Oldfield held the throttle wide open, the tractor reached 81.2 miles per hour before he backed off. The unofficial speed was recorded by independent timing equipment and witnessed by automotive journalists. But there was a problem. The run wasn't sanctioned by any official land speed record body. The Fédération Internationale d'Automobile didn't recognize tractors as a category, and the various American motorsports associations were uncertain how to classify the attempt. As a result, Massey Harris claimed a world record, but it was never officially certified. The controversy didn't matter much to the public. Newspapers ran the story anyway, and the Challenger's reputation as the fastest tractor in the world was cemented. But by 1939, the golden age of tractor racing was already beginning to fade. The outbreak of World War II shifted national priorities. Steel, rubber, and fuel became rationed commodities, and the idea of building machines purely for promotional purposes seemed frivolous in the face of global conflict. Allis-Chalmers, Minneapolis Moline, and Massey Harris all shifted their production to support the war effort, building tractors for agricultural production to feed Allied troops and manufacturing components for military vehicles. The racing tractors were quietly retired, parked in warehouses, and largely forgotten. Frank Houcks never returned to tractor racing. In 1938, he was killed in a plane crash during an air show in New York, a tragic end to one of aviation's great showmen. Speed Hinckley continued racing after the war, but the tractor racing circuit never revived. By the late 1940s, the agricultural equipment industry had moved on. Diesel engines were becoming the new standard, hydraulic systems were revolutionizing implement control, and the focus had shifted from speed to efficiency and power. The days of racing tractors at 80 miles per hour on salt flats in fairground tracks seemed like a distant, almost surreal memory. Many of the racing tractors themselves were scrapped or modified beyond recognition. The Allis-Chalmers Model U machines that Ab Jenkins had piloted were eventually returned to standard farm duty, their racing engines replaced with stock components. The Minneapolis Moline UDLX tractors, already rare, became collector's items. A few survive today in museums and private collections. The Massey Harris Challenger, despite its engineering brilliance, was a commercial failure. Fewer than 2,000 units were ever built, and production ended in 1942. The few racing spec Challengers that existed were either scrapped during wartime metal drives or quietly dismantled. But the legacy of these machines lived on in unexpected ways. The pneumatic tire technology developed for racing became standard on virtually all farm tractors by the 1950s, dramatically improving traction, ride comfort, and field performance. The high-speed gearing systems pioneered for the racing tractors influenced the design of transport tractors that could move quickly between fields and farms. And the promotional strategies developed by Harry Merritt and Allis-Chalmers, using spectacle, speed, and celebrity endorsements to sell industrial equipment, became a template that manufacturers would follow for decades.
Today, the story of racing tractors seems almost unbelievable. It's hard to imagine a world where farm equipment manufacturers spent enormous sums of money building machines that could compete with race cars, where thousands of people would pack grandstands to watch tractors duel on dirt tracks, and where land speed records for agricultural machinery made front-page news. But that world existed, if only for a brief, wild moment in the 1930s when American industry was desperate, innovative, and willing to try anything to survive the Depression. The racing tractors were born out of desperation, but they succeeded because they tapped into something fundamental about American culture, the belief that anything, even a plow-pulling farm machine, could be made faster, better, and more exciting with enough ingenuity and audacity. Harry Merritt understood this when he sent Ab Jenkins to Bonneville with a modified Model U. Frank Hawks understood it when he lined up against midget racers at state fairs. Speed Hinckley understood it when he pushed the UDLX past 78 miles per hour on the salt flats. They weren't selling tractors. They were selling dreams of power, modernity, and American can-do spirit. The machines themselves were engineering marvels. Production tractors pushed far beyond their design limits, modified with technologies borrowed from auto racing and aviation, and operated by men who had no business trying to coax 80 miles per hour out of something built to pull a plow. The fact that they succeeded, that they set real records and competed in real races, is a testament to the skill of the engineers and drivers who made it happen. These weren't stunt machines built in secret skunkworks labs. They were based on actual production tractors that farmers could buy, which made the achievements even more remarkable. The impact on the tractor industry was profound. Allis-Chalmers went from near bankruptcy in 1933 to a major player in the market by 1940, fueled largely by the publicity generated by their racing program. Minneapolis Moline and Massey Harris also saw significant benefits, even if their racing tractors didn't achieve the same commercial success. The promotional strategies pioneered during this era, using motorsports, celebrity endorsements, and public demonstrations to sell industrial equipment, became standard practice across the industry and influenced how companies market everything from construction machinery to commercial trucks today. But perhaps the most lasting legacy is technological. The racing programs forced manufacturers to solve problems they would never have encountered in normal farm use. How do you keep a 4-cylinder engine from shaking itself apart at sustained high RPMs? How do you design tires that can grip on salt at 80 miles per hour and still work in a muddy field? How do you build a transmission that can handle the shock loads of racing starts while remaining durable enough for years of farm work? The solutions to these problems, better materials, improved manufacturing techniques, more sophisticated engineering, filtered down into production tractors and made them better machines. A handful of the racing tractors survive in museums and private collections, carefully preserved as artifacts of a stranger, more audacious time. The Smithsonian Institution houses one of the Allis-Chalmers Model U tractors that Ab Jenkins drove. A UDLX sits in the Minnesota History Center. Its enclosed cabin and luxury features a reminder of Minneapolis Moline's brief flirtation with tractor opulence.
A Massey Harris Challenger rests in a Canadian agricultural museum, its streamlined bodywork still elegant nearly a century later. These machines draw curious visitors who struggle to reconcile their appearance with their purpose. They look too fast, too aggressive, too purpose-built to be farm tractors. And in a sense, they weren't. They were something else entirely. Racing machines that happened to be able to pull a plow. The drivers and engineers who built these machines are largely forgotten now, their achievements overshadowed by the more famous exploits of automobile racing. But for a brief moment in the 1930s, they were stars. Men who pushed farm equipment to speeds that seemed impossible and captured the imagination of a nation struggling through the Depression. They proved that with enough engineering skill, promotional genius, and sheer audacity, even the most unlikely machine could become a symbol of speed and power. In the end, the racing tractors of the 1930s were a perfect storm of desperation, innovation, and showmanship. A moment when the agricultural equipment industry looked at the abyss of bankruptcy and decided that the answer was to go faster. It was absurd. It was brilliant. And for those who witnessed it, it was unforgettable.